My name is Michael, and if there's one thing people assume about millionaires like me, it's that we have everything. Huge houses, luxury cars, private jets, 5-star dinners. But what no one talks about is how empty those mansions can feel when you have no one to come home to. Ever since my mother passed away, the silence in this house became deafening. No music, no laughter, no scent of fresh pie on a Sunday morning. Just sterile meetings, expensive scotch, and employees who walk on eggshells not to disturb me. I barely talk to them. Truth is, I barely talk to anyone. But everything changed on a morning that started like any other. It was 6:30 a.m. I was on my back porch, sipping black coffee alone. The sky still had that pre-dawn blue, and I had just opened my laptop to check emails when I noticed something out of place in the garden. A shadow. At first I thought it was a stray dog, but it wasn't. I stood up, walked down the stone steps and toward the edge of the yard. Someone was sleeping there. I stopped a few feet away. It was an elderly woman, skinny, curled up under a worn blanket. Her head rested on a grocery bag, and her hands were clasped together as if she had prayed before falling asleep. She smelled of dust and cold nights, but somehow there was also something warm about her, something familiar. I didn't make a sound. I just watched. Her face was full of wrinkles but peaceful, as if in that forgotten corner of my perfect lawn she had found more rest than the entire world had offered her. I stayed there for several minutes, frozen. Then I heard footsteps. It was Lucille, the housekeeper. She stopped when she saw me and the woman and lowered her head like a kid caught doing something wrong. "Who is that?" I asked. "She's Mrs. Edna," Lucille replied. "She's been sleeping back here for a few days now. I found her last week near the back gate. Weak, dirty. But she apologized for breathing in my yard." "That broke my heart, Mr. Michael. I didn't know what to say." Lucille went on. "I've been bringing her some food. She doesn't ask for much. She's polite, like someone's grandma." I looked at the woman again. Mrs. Edna, such a simple name, but right then it felt holy. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to remind Lucille that this was private property, not a shelter, that I wasn't running a charity. But I didn't say any of that. I bit my tongue. There was something about that woman that disarmed me, something that hurt, and I didn't even know why. I went back inside without a word, but that day I didn't check my emails. I didn't take any calls. I just kept thinking about Mrs. Edna, the way she clung to that patch of dirt like it was the last safe place she had. And that night, I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was that quiet ache I always carry around, the one I never talk about. But that same afternoon, I found myself walking toward the garden again. The sun was high, warm, the kind of warmth that smells like dry leaves and soil, the kind that reminded me of summers at my grandmother's house in Kentucky. I pretended I was checking the sprinklers. Truth was, I wanted to see if she was still there. She was. Mrs. Edna was sitting on a small concrete bench near the azaleas. She held a broom made from sticks and an old mop handle, sweeping fallen leaves with slow, deliberate movements, like she was painting something invisible on the ground. She didn't see me, which gave me the freedom to watch her. Her dress was faded, her sandals loose on her feet, the same blanket folded over her shoulders like a shawl, and on her wrist, a little worn-out rosary tied gently, like it had been there for decades. She was murmuring to herself. Took me a minute to realize she was praying. Hail Mary, full of grace. Soft, steady, like she was holding the world together with those words. A few minutes later, Lucille came out with a tray, covered with a dish towel with a strawberry print. She handed it to her like it was treasure. Mrs. Edna smiled with such gratitude, I felt something twist in my chest. "God bless you, sweetheart," she whispered, holding the plate like it was gold. I stepped back into the house, quiet. Once. Again, I didn't work that day or the next after that. I started going out to the yard more often, not for the view, not for the fresh air, but to see her. Every time she was doing something, cleaning, watering plants, folding old rags, always moving, always gentle, like she felt she owed us something for letting her breathe our air. One day, my driver, Carl, told me he caught her cleaning a pair of muddy shoes we had left by the garage. He said she washed them with a wet cloth and lined them up perfectly to dry. Then Carl laughed and said, "She's got more dignity than half the politicians in this country, sir." I didn't laugh, but the words stayed with me. Another time I overheard her praying again. From the hallway, I stopped when I heard the names. "Bless Lucille, bless Carls, and bless Mr. Michael. May he find peace." Peace. She prayed for me. How could she know what I needed? That night I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, trying to make sense of it all. I looked toward the garden. She was asleep again on the same cardboard mat, wrapped in that same blanket. But next to her head, there was a tiny flower in a plastic cup, and beside it, a little butterscotch candy, neatly wrapped in blue paper. I don't know who it was for, maybe for me, maybe for someone she lost. But that night I realized something. She hadn't come to ask me for anything. She came to remind me I still had a heart. I've always been good at control, in business, in conversations, in every room I walk into. I'm the one people listen to. That's how I built my empire. That's how I survived Wall Street. That's how I lost my soul. But that morning, I snapped. I woke up sweating, heart racing. Had a dream I hadn't had in years. My mother was brushing my hair with her fingers, whispering, "My sweet boy, come home." It shook me hard. At 5:15 a.m., I walked outside barefoot, not even bothering with my robe. The air was cool and smelled like pine. I didn't even know why I was walking to the back of the property, but I did. And there she was, Mrs. Edna, curled up on that same worn-out cardboard, wrapped in her blanket like a child hiding from the world, her shoes off, her feet blue from the cold, and something inside me, something old and bitter, just erupted. I stormed toward her. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted. She woke up startled, eyes wide. She tried to sit up quickly but struggled. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said softly. "I didn't mean any harm. I just needed somewhere safe for a little while." Her voice was trembling. She looked terrified. Right then, Lucille came running, apron half-tied, panic in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Michael, don't be mad. She hasn't hurt anyone. She's just been sleeping out here, quiet, respectful, like someone's grandma." "How long has this been going on?" I asked through gritted teeth. "About 2 weeks, she said. "We've just been giving her a little food. That's all. She never even..." Steps inside. My blood boiled. I wanted to scream at everyone, "Fire Lucille, fire Carl, clear the place out." How could they let this happen under my roof? What would the neighbors say? What would the board say if they found out? "This is private property," I shouted, "not a damn shelter." "You all took advantage of my kindness." Carl came up the steps trying to diffuse the tension. "Sir, with all due respect, she's done nothing wrong. She just needed a place to rest." "I'm calling the police," I growled, pulling out my phone. Lucille dropped to her knees in front of Mrs. Edna. "Please, Mr. Michael, I beg you, don't do this." But I had already dialed. As I waited, I looked at Mrs. Edna. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She just looked at me with those tired eyes. And what I saw there wasn't anger. It was compassion, like she felt sorry for me. The squad car pulled up 15 minutes. Later, she didn't resist. She stood up straight, smoothed her dress, and turned to me. "Thank you," she said gently, "for letting me dream a little. May God bless you." She stepped into the car like a saint going to jail, and I stood there, on my perfect lawn, surrounded by perfect hedges and a flawless morning, feeling like the worst kind of man. The sound of the patrol car pulling away stayed with me long after it disappeared down the street. Lucille had gone back inside in tears. Carl didn't say a word. He just looked at me like he didn't recognize the man he worked for. And honestly, I didn't recognize myself either. I walked back into my house, shut every curtain, and locked myself in my study, poured a double shot of whiskey, then another. But the silence was deafening. And in that silence, something spoke, louder than any voice I'd ever heard. "She was just an old lady. She never asked you for anything. Why did you treat her like trash?" I couldn't answer, so I got angry. I picked up the glass and hurled it at the bookshelf mirror. It shattered with a crash, glass and liquor exploding across the floor. An hour later, Lucille knocked softly on my door. She had something in her hands. "She left this behind," she said with puffy eyes, "before they took her." It was a small fabric pouch. Inside were 3 things: a tiny rosary, a folded letter, and a single peppermint wrapped in a tissue. The letter was written in shaky handwriting on school notebook paper. It read, "Dear Miss Edna, thank you for teaching me to read. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. Jason, 3rd grade." That broke me. I dropped to my knees, right there on the carpet, clutching the letter to my chest, and I cried. Not the silent, elegant kind of crying. I sobbed. I choked. The kind of crying that scrapes your insides and leaves you raw. I stayed in that room for 2 days, didn't eat, didn't talk to anyone, couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. Not that there was much mirror left. The image of her climbing into that police car haunted me, but what hurt the most was that she had looked at me with forgiveness. She didn't scream, didn't curse me. She blessed me. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was Lucille. Her voice was shaking. "Mr. Michael, she's in the hospital." My heart skipped. "What? Why?" "She fainted at the station. They said she hadn't eaten. Her pressure dropped. She collapsed. She's all alone." I didn't think. I didn't grab my driver. I didn't check my calendar. I grabbed my keys. And for the first time in over a decade, I drove myself. The entire way there, I thought about the last time I saw my mother, alive. She was in a hospital bed too. I had been late again, caught in some pointless board meeting. When I finally arrived, she had just enough strength to whisper, "I hope you grow into a kind man more than a rich one." At the time, I hadn't understood. But now I knew exactly what she meant. I didn't know what I was going to say, didn't know what she'd say. All I knew was that I couldn't let her be alone, not again. When I arrived at the hospital, that familiar smell of antiseptic and old curtains hit me like a memory I'd spent years trying to bury. The buzzing lights, the nurses with rushed steps, the beep of monitors. It was all too familiar. A nurse approached me. "Are you a relative of Edna Brooks?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Yes," I said. "I'm her son." She led me down a sterile hallway to a small room with beige walls and a narrow window. Inside, the room was quiet, and there, lying in that hospital bed, was Mrs. Edna. She looked so small, so fragile. Her hair was thin, her face pale. A hospital bracelet clung loosely to her wrist, and an IV bag hung above her like a slow, ticking clock. I stepped closer and saw a small, spiral notebook on the bedside table. It was filled with handwritten prayers. And right there, scrawled in pencil, "Lord, bless Lucille, bless Carl, and please bless Mr. Michael. May he find peace. That was it. I fell apart. I pulled the chair next to her bed and grabbed her hand. It was light, cold, like holding something made of paper and memories. I didn't speak, I just sat there staring at her, listening to the soft sound of her breathing, letting the silence wrap around us. Then, almost like a whisper, her eyes opened. "Oh, my sweet boy," she said, voice barely audible. "I knew you'd come. God told me." I broke. Again. Tears ran down my face before I could stop them. I leaned over and rested my head on her hand. She moved her frail fingers into my hair, gently, slowly, just like my mother used to. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry. I was cruel. I was blind. I treated you like nothing." She shook her head ever so gently. "You're not a bad man," she said. "Just a hurting one. But God's working on that now. Don't carry guilt. Let him heal you." We sat in silence, a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of grace, forgiveness, and something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later, the doctor walked in and asked if I was a family member. I looked up, still holding her hand. "I am," I said, "and I'm not leaving her side. Ever again." That night, I stayed in a chair beside her bed. Didn't sleep much, but when I did, I slept in peace. When Mrs. Edna was discharged from the hospital, I didn't hesitate for a second. She was coming home. My home. Not because I felt guilty, not anymore, but because I finally understood what had been missing in my life. Warmth, presence, a heartbeat in these walls. I personally picked her up in my car. I lined the seat with a soft blanket, turned off the AC. She said it bothered her arthritis. Played soft classical music, just loud enough to feel like background comfort. When we pulled up to the house, Lucille and Carl were waiting at the door like family. Lucille ran to her and hugged her tightly. Carl took off his hat and kissed her hand. I stood back just watching this woman who had come into our lives like a breeze, quiet, unnoticed, now being welcomed like a queen. "She's staying here," I said. "As long as she wants, as long as she needs. This is her home now." We set up a cozy guest room for her. Not fancy, just warm. Floral curtains, a rocking chair by the window, an old quilt on the bed, and a little wooden cross above the nightstand. She looked around with soft tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. "I only need kindness." That night, I passed by her room and heard her voice through the door. "And bless Michael, Lord. He's finding his way." I stood there in the hallway, hand against the wall, heart pounding. In the days that followed, the house came alive. Mrs. Edna started helping Lucille in the kitchen. At first, she just watched. Then she started giving tips. Then, full recipes. She taught them how to make banana bread with cinnamon, chicken, and dumplings, and even apple cobbler the way her mama used to make back in Georgia. And the smell, oh God, it wrapped around the house like a hug you didn't know you needed. Carl became her sidekick. He started writing down her sayings, asking about her past, learning about old remedies she used to do with a pinch of salt and a whole lot of prayer. One day he shouted from the kitchen, "Boss, if laughter is medicine, I'm overdosing." Since Miss Edna moved in, we all laughed. And I realized I hadn't laughed like that in years. One evening I found her in the garden, reading the letter from the little boy again. Jason, 3rd grade. She had it in her lap, folded carefully, with a peppermint tucked in the fold. "I used to think I was invisible," she said, without looking up. "But God saw me, and now, so do you." That hit deep. That night, the house echoed with music. Mrs. Edna sang an old gospel hymn, Lucille banged a wooden spoon on a pot for rhythm, and Carl clapped along offbeat. I sat on the stairs just listening, smiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Belonging, And I realized something else. It wasn't the chandeliers or marble floors that made a house beautiful. It was the people who knew how to fill it with love. Life has a cruel way of testing your healing. Just when everything starts to feel right, the past shows up with a grin and a polished watch. It was a calm Thursday afternoon. The sun was low, the sky soft orange. Mrs. Edna was in the backyard, sitting under the maple tree, stitching a kitchen towel with a small red heart. I was watching her from the porch, pretending to read the paper, but really just feeling grateful. Then Carl walked over, his face tense. "Mr. Michael, there's a man and a woman at the gate. They say they're Mrs. Edna's children." I felt my stomach drop. I looked at her. She had heard it too. "Robert? Lisa," she whispered, standing up slowly. I walked with her to the front of the house. There they were, two polished strangers, designer sunglasses, expensive shoes, phones in hand, their smiles tight and rehearsed. "Hi," the man said, extending his hand to me like we were equals. "I'm Robert. That's my sister, Lisa. We heard our mum was staying here. We just wanted to check in, make sure everything's okay." Lisa chimed in with a nasal, fake concerned voice. "Yeah, we've been so busy, but we missed her." Lies, all of it. Still, Mrs. Edna's eyes sparkled. She reached out to hug them. They returned the gesture, briefly, barely touching, like she was contagious. Lucille, sweet as ever, brought out lemonade and oatmeal cookies. Robert made a face like we'd offered him prison food. Lisa asked if we had anything vegan and sugar-free. I had to clench my jaw not to burst out laughing or yelling. They didn't ask how she was feeling. Didn't notice the blanket on her lap or the faint bruises from the hospital. They just looked around the house like vultures measuring up a will. Robert leaned toward me at one point. "It's really kind of you to let her stay. I assume there's been some paperwork, documents, just so everything's clear." Lisa added with a fake smile, "We just want what's best for her. And, well, for everyone." The audacity was stunning. Then it happened. Mrs. Edna, still hopeful, asked, "Would you stay for dinner? I was going to make chicken pot pie like I used to." Robert blinked. "Oh, no thanks, Mum. We don't eat that kind of food anymore." Lisa rolled her eyes and muttered something about carbs. I saw it. The way her shoulders dropped, the way the light in her eyes flickered. That night, I overheard them whispering, outside while waiting for their Uber. "She's got to be worth something now," Robert said. Lisa replied, "If she's living with a millionaire, we better act fast. She doesn't have that much time left." The world stopped spinning. I walked out of the shadows and faced them. "Get out." They blinked, pretending to be confused. I said, "Get off my property. You're not children. You're parasites." Mrs. Edna had stepped into the doorway. She heard it all. And, in a voice soft but steady, she said, "I forgave you when you sold my house, when you stopped calling, when you left me on a sidewalk in the rain. But tonight, you made me feel unwanted in a home full of love. They didn't apologize, they didn't cry, they just turned and left. That night, I cooked the chicken pot pie myself. Lucille helped. Carl set the table, and when it was ready, I served her the first slice and said, 'You may not be my mother by blood, Mrs. Edna, but I'd be honored if you let me be your son.' She took my hand with teary eyes and replied, 'You already are, sweetheart, you already are.' This time I didn't hesitate. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just ready to do what was right. I called my attorney. 'I want to transfer a property,' I said, 'to Mrs. Edna Brooks, fully legally, no strings attached. I want it to be hers, and safe from anyone who ever made her feel disposable. I chose a modest house in Vermont, a sweet little place with a front porch, a garden full of wildflowers, a cozy fireplace, and a rocking chair under a maple tree. It smelled like peace and sounded like second chances. While my lawyer handled the paperwork, I planned something more personal. I asked Lucille to help me prepare 2 small care packages. Each one had a container of cold white rice, a slice of stale bread, and a printed note. One for Robert, one for Lisa. Carl delivered them in person. He came back grinning ear to ear. "You should have seen their faces, boss. They opened the packages thinking it was some kind of inheritance gift. When they read the notes, Robert turned red. Lisa dropped hers in the trash. The note said, 'Tonight your mother is having homemade pot pie surrounded by people who love her. You get rice and crumbs, just like what you left her with.'" They never came back. A few days later, I took Mrs. Edna for a ride. I didn't tell her where we were going, just said it was a surprise. She wore a soft green sweater and kept asking if we were going to a farmer's market. When we pulled into the driveway of the Vermont cottage, she gasped, then whispered, "This can't be." "It is," I told her. "All yours. Deed signed. Taxes covered. Garden full of daisies and fresh mint. And it's yours. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Yours forever." She didn't speak, just brought her hand to her mouth and cried silently. Then, with trembling hands, she touched the porch railing, looked up at the sky and said, "Thank you, Lord. Not just for the roof, but for the dignity." On the way back home, she held my hand and said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just give me a house, Michael. You gave me the chance to leave this world feeling seen." And in that moment, I realized something. Giving isn't about what you hand over. It's about what you restore. And real power isn't about money, it's about protection. Real love protects. She wasn't my mother, but she made me feel like a son, and I had become the man she believed I could be. Before Mrs. Edna, my house was like a high-end hotel that no one actually lived in. Everything was perfect. The marble floors, the wine cellar, the curated artwork. But there was no warmth, no life, no reason to stay in any room longer than necessary. Now, even the silence sounds different. Each morning starts with the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not that expensive machine-made nonsense I used to drink. Lucille and Mrs. Edna hum old gospel hymns in the kitchen, while something is always baking: biscuits, cornbread, cinnamon rolls. And if I happen to wake up late, Mrs. Edna leaves me a covered plate with a sticky note. Still warm, but even if it wasn't, it's made with love. There's always something bubbling on the stove. Chicken soup with fresh thyme, beef stew, or peach cobbler cooling on the windowsill like in some small-town movie. Carl's become her apprentice. One day he came into my office, grinning and covered in flour. "Boss, if joy had calories, I'd be diabetic since this lady moved in." Mrs. Edna teaches us more than just recipes. She teaches life. She has a saying for everything. You can't fix your heart with money, sugar. If the day's bitter, put honey in your soul. Don't trust a man who never laughs at himself. I swear, I should start a book of Edna-isms. One Saturday afternoon, something happened that I'll never forget. The sky was gray. We were all in the kitchen. Carl was beating eggs way too fast. Lucille had flour on her nose. And Mrs. Edna was laughing so hard she had to hold her ribs. And I was standing in the doorway, watching. Something inside me just clicked. I took a picture with my phone, then printed it, had it framed, and hung it right at the front door, replacing an abstract painting I bought for $50,000 that I never even liked. Now when people walk into my house, the first thing they see is that picture. Lucille with her hands on her hips, Carl holding a spoon like a mic, Mrs. Edna mid-laugh, and me, off to the side, smiling like I'd finally found something worth smiling for. That night I passed by the photo and just stood there. Mrs. Edna came up behind me and said, "You know what I love most about this house now? It doesn't echo anymore." And she was right. The halls that once sounded hollow now rang with laughter. The kitchen that once smelled sterile now smelled like Sunday morning, and my heart finally felt like it belonged somewhere. This mansion hadn't changed on the outside, but inside it had become a place where love lived. It had become home. Mrs. Edna turned 78 on a quiet Sunday morning with the sky painted in soft blue and golden light. She had completely forgotten the date. "Today? Are you sure, honey?" she asked, chuckling as she adjusted the little cardigan she wore around the house. "I'm sure," I said, smiling. "And you're having the birthday party you never had." She laughed nervously. "Don't be silly, I never had one even as a child, not gonna start now." But I knew better. She deserved a celebration worthy of the love she brought into our lives. We got up early. Lucille and Carl were more excited than kids on Christmas morning. Lucille hung colorful paper garlands. Carl tied balloons to every chair. I called a local jazz trio that played classic oldies and asked them to show up dressed in vintage clothes. We set a long table under the maple tree, covered it with a red checkered tablecloth and filled it with everything she loved. Peach cobbler, fried chicken sliders, cornbread muffins, sweet tea in mason jars, and a big vanilla cake with Happy 78 Miss Edna written in pink frosting. When she stepped out and saw it all, she froze, one hand to her chest, the other trembling slightly. "All of this is for me?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, "for the woman who turned this house into a home." Her eyes filled instantly. Lucille hugged her tight. Carl placed a crown made of garden daisies on her head and said, "Your Majesty, your throne awaits." We sang Happy Birthday twice, once in full chorus, once with laughter and clapping, offbeat. She cut the cake and gave the first slice to me. "This one's for you," she said, "because you gave me the one thing no one else ever did, the right to grow old with dignity." I couldn't answer. I just hugged her, tight, long, quiet. Later, she danced slowly with Carl under the string lights. Lucille clapped along. I sat on the porch steps watching it all, and for the first time in decades I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. Later that night, we all sat in the backyard. She had a quilt over her lap and her feet in fluffy slippers. The stars were out. Carl made jokes. Lucille handed out apple slices. I looked at them, this odd little family, and felt something I never thought I'd feel again. Wholeness. Mrs. Edna looked at me and said, "You know what's funny? I'm not your blood, but you love me like I am. And that's worth more than any inheritance." We sat in silence after that. The kind of silence you don't want to break, the kind that feels like prayer. And if you're still listening to my story, if you've made it this far, then let me tell you what I've learned. True love doesn't require DNA, just presence. And when it finds you, it heals everything. And remember, evil is never far as it always finds a way back. But goodness, when it's found a place to stay, it stays forever.